Kia ora, it's Tristan here from New Zealand. I'm going to be doing another artist in residence interview today. This time it's going to be with the talented Daniel Sperber, who's a guitarist, composer, songwriter, who I've actually known for quite a while. And we actually lived quite close to each other for a while in Glen Eden. And so, yeah, hope you enjoy it. This interview is pretty much what the Artist in Residence Kaupapa is about. It's about finding out about how to make art, how we get to where we are, how it relates to the community that raises us and brings out all of our talents, and how we move into the future as creatives, and how do we do it in the space that we call home. So it's great to finally have you here.
Thanks.
And I was just thinking, just before we sort of get into the full yarnage, I was just thinking about how to talk about how we know each other, and I probably know you before you know me, if that makes sense. And I just thought I'd just share that when I was about 18, I moved to Auckland, and a friend of mine, I don't know, do you know Nina McSweeney? She used to go to Northcote College. She went over on one of those trips to one of the jazz festivals back in the day, but she knew a whole heap of people, and so she said, oh, she come out to Rakino's, and I think she took me to see Canvas, which was like a little weird side project from New Loungehead.
Canvas, was that maybe something? Was that something like Godfrey's or something?
It was Godfrey and basically other people, but there was definitely some tunes from the New Loungehead sort of set that we're playing, and it was very sort of that sort of vibe. And then I just kept on going back, and yeah, I caught a whole heap of your sets back in probably from April '97 onwards, somewhere around that period of time.
With Loungehead, do you mean?
Yeah, is it just from just at Rakino's, and yeah, and so all of that happened, and I went away to to Wellington, studied jazz and stuff like that.
I don't know if that I think Loungehead only ever played at Rakino once.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, and I've got a pretty steel trap memory for this stuff for whatever reason, and we played there once because there was an outdoor concert that had been planned in Freiburg Place on a big stage they put there, and it started raining.
Yep.
And everyone was bummed, and then the people at Rakino said, "Oh, come up and play upstairs up here," and so a bunch of people squashed in there.
Oh wow.
Yeah, but because I think maybe even by the time Rakino was around, I think Loungehead's audience had sort of grown, and yeah, I don't think we would have played there.
Well,
otherwise.
I definitely went to one.
Yeah, and definitely I definitely played there a lot with Relaxomatic and its precursor.
Yep, I did see you with Luke there a little bit later on. Yep.
Yeah,
but I definitely remember seeing, the whole Chip, and well, all of the band members. Perhaps not. I think I saw you at the Greyland Festival as well.
Oh yeah.
I remember that. But yeah, so I think all of that sort of happened in the sort of the late 90s, and then and then when I moved back to Auckland in 2000, and we moved to West Auckland probably about 2007. I think we bumped into each other on the train, and I was like, I recognize you, and we just and I think
Glen Eden Station there, yeah.
That's right. Yeah. And so I just I think for me it's those sort of weird little connections that you have, like in New Zealand. It's just everyone knows everybody.
There are certain people that you just keep sort of bumping into, and you became one of those people. Like like people aren't necessarily your friends, or like you just sort of initially or whatever, you just kind of, but we just bump into each other so often at the Glen Eden Library and all these places. Yeah, that's interesting. Right. And yes, yeah.
There's the, I don't know if you might spend much time in Wellington, but there's the Cuba Street effect, where
what is that?
You just walk past people enough at some point. I think I was in Auckland one time, and I just saw someone, and I was like, I know you. And then they walked over to me, and then we're like, actually, no, we just know each other from walking past each other at Cuba Street all the time. So yeah, so it's a real thing. But yeah, I think that familiarity and makes it a lot easier to network and all that.
Music is always a great pretext for meeting people, isn't it?
That's right. Yeah. And I remember when I first caught up with you, you invited me over to one of your listening sessions, which I think is an amazing idea for musicians and people who
like sitting around listening to LPs in my grotty old shed back in Rosier Road. Yeah.
That was great. Great. I love that. How long are you still doing that sort of stuff at the moment?
So like having people over and listening to LPs. No, I guess not. But it's I did do a DJ night the other night with Alan Perrott, who goes under the name House of Bamboo, and we did an easy listening night at Cupid Bar.
Oh, nice.
And it reminded me a bit of that because there wasn't a whole lot. There weren't a whole lot of people there that night, and so it was quite intimate. And we're just playing our craziest, weird lounge music records, like those LPs which only have one good song on them, maybe which has some kind of like fast bass line or a grunty beat or a moog or something like that going on, and you fall in love with it. And not necessarily many other people do, but it's just sort of got something. And so Alan and I are both aficionados of those kind of records. The ones that you can still find in op shops, but nobody knows there's like one track on it which has got like a really fat beat or whatever. That stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. You know Ben McNichol pretty well. Eh?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. He's got an amazing album by Leonard somebody, and it's got a song called Leroy on it, and that's a guilty pleasure if I've ever heard one. Yeah,
I find them all the time. I found this beautiful French song a couple of days ago. It's called Il y avait un jardin. There was a garden,
nice.
And the name, I think the guys, I can't remember the guy's name, but I think he's a Greek guy. It was quite a big hit in 1971. And it's this kind of French folk song, a bit of a kind of hippie sort of vibe, with talking about the concrete cities and the contrast with the Eden-like idyll, and it's just got this fantastic little bass line that sounds like it could be from like something with really banging drums, and it just works beautifully against it. Yeah, Il y avait un jardin.
So you just drop it in on top of something else, or
no? Just listen to it and imagine.
Oh yeah, cool. I know that we've sort of talked about it a little bit in the past, but I was just wondering about like what was your first memory of music or art that really kind of
first memory of music? Yes, my first memory of music, a couple of songs. One is La Paloma Blanca. Ooh, La Paloma Blanca. Sort of like it was kind of like a Euro hit. I don't know if it was Eurovision or something. And another one of the same kind of ilk, which was called Mammy Blue. Ooh, Mammy, Mammy Blue.
Yeah.
And which I think was made famous by the George Baker set or something like that.
Yep.
But was probably recorded on a crap ton of like of kind of early of those albums in the early 70s that like were across all sorts of countries, that were just like kind of local orchestral vocal groups performing pop hits of the day.
Sure. Yeah.
Which is that same genre that I was just describing before that I enjoy.
Yeah.
Most of the stuff is quite hard to listen to, not that easy. But anyway, those two songs, I can remember my mum putting those on the record player and me wanting to hear those over and over again. When I was, that feeling of I have to hear that again. I might have been 3 or 4, living in Marktredwitz in Bavaria in Germany.
Wow. Yeah. I was going to say, for the song choices, I was like, this is I was like, then my next question is, you want to talk about how is it that you hit Eurovision? And yeah. That's cool.
Yeah. So I mean, I didn't know about anything about Eurovision or anything when I was living in Germany. I left there when I was 7, but
and you moved.
Certainly, there was. Sorry.
I was going to say you moved over here directly to New Zealand at that time, or?
Yeah, we did. Yeah, the whole family immigrated. My parents and my brother and I, and we landed in St Heliers in Auckland.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
In terms of, you know, I mean, going from like having an awareness of music, when did it sort of start become a thing that you wanted to do? Like, and how did that go into you learning about your craft?
Yeah, it was kind of kicking around the house in the form of a guitar. So my mum, back in the 1960s, used to play and sing in student bars in Jerusalem, doing like Joan Baez covers, that kind of thing. And she was at art school, and it was kind of her part-time job, I guess. And so, and she had this guitar, and it was a pretty cool looking guitar. I've still got it, and I still use it sometimes. And she didn't play it much at all in my childhood, and you know, she had never really played again, or hasn't. I mean, she's still around. But it was sort of around. It was there, and there was a when I got interested in the guitar, there was a record around the house by a guitarist called Marcel Dadi. Have you ever heard of him?
I have. I think you may have played me this guy at some point.
Possibly, yeah, because he's a kind of a folky, beardy kind of guy. Looks a bit like you, actually. Yeah. And he, in the record, there was a full booklet of quite beautifully hand-noted or hand-noted looking tablature, hand-notated tablature. And tablature wasn't around that much, even, you know, when I was a kid. And so it offered this sort of possibility when I started learning the guitar. It's like, I might be able to figure out a bit of this Marcel Dadi stuff. It always seemed somewhat unreachable for me. Like it was quite complicated, you know, they had walking bass lines and these different parts, but it really got me interested. So that was one thing. And another thing was, my parents were friends with this woman called Loretta, and her husband at the time was a guy called Peter Hader. And he is another German, has been resident in Auckland since the 80s, since that time. And he is an amazing guitarist. And I remember him coming, you know, so, and when I was my parents knew I was interested in the guitar, and so they sort of, you know, there were a couple of awkward sort of put Dan together with this amazing guitarist. And I remember him showing me like harmonics. He could play harmonics, and I didn't know what those were, you know, those kind of little memories. I could go on, actually, because all of those moments are really seared in my memory, particularly anything at high school where there was a visiting musician, a visiting band. I think, I remember once Gunther Herbig came to my school, Selwyn College, and he is a classical guitarist who now lives in Wellington, another German. And he did a little classical performance in the school hall at lunchtime that a few of us guitar enthusiasts attended. And it was beautiful. And I remember being really struck by him leaving on his motorbike with his guitar on the back. So there's this guy comes and plays classical music and then rocks off on his motorbike with the guitar in the back.
This is the cool guitarist with leather jacket.
In fact, I recently I reconnected. Well, I met. I was in touch with Gunther. We somehow connected over Facebook. He put something up about an album that I'd recorded, and we got sort of chatting, and I ended up having just recently I've had a few guitar lessons with him.
Oh wow!
Because he plays. He now has been recording classical music on electric guitar, classical guitar music, or actually not even classical, just classical music, shall we say, on an electric guitar, and I was interested in his technique.
Yeah. It's steel string with tremolo is weird. for me,
like playing it.
Yeah, when you're doing the
Yeah,
thing,
yeah. Well, yeah, we were talking a lot about fingernails and and the amount of kind of care that he has to take over his fingernails. Amazing. I've been trying to grow mine, but it's very, very slow progress. Constantly having to sort of rethink what I do with them and how I treat them. But I think they're quite a necessary part of the technique. So I'm experimenting a bit with that.
Yeah, I used to bite my nails when I was a kid, right? And then at some point I decided I wanted to try learn how to play flamenco guitar, and that was when I stopped biting my nails.
Yeah,
like
right.
The habit, and and that, well, after all of the stuff that my mum and dad tried to do, they should have just tried to get me to do flamenco, and I would have, got straight into it. Yeah. But yeah, it's, you get really, I'm like trying to open doors with my left hand and stuff like that.
So have you got long nails now?
Not as long as I had them. I used to have much longer thumbnails, but it was maybe about 10 years ago. I just really got into it. Yeah.
I'm not sure if how that's going to work, but or whether I'll end it, because I've got quite sort of, my nails seem quite soft, although that might change with care. Yeah, it's cool to try other stuff anyway. It gets you just thinking along different lines. And even if I come back and just go back to my stumpy finger style electrics I haven't used a pick for years, then at least I've kind of, looked at and heard some alternatives, and that's nice.
Yeah. When I was just to go back, would you say Marcel Duddy was he like your first big influence? Would you kind of clarify that? Or
on guitar,
well, just musical, really, to be honest.
I'm going to say Jimmy Page. Okay. And it's funny that, because often a musical influence isn't just a musical influence. You read about them, you want to know about their lives and so on. And he doesn't come off that well, in retrospect, when you think about his life and lifestyle choices. I guess you can't, I guess that just is what it is. But
none of us do.
potentially, yeah. I guess so. I guess in history is always rewriting itself, but for some reason I'm just sort of a little bit aware when I say Jimmy Page, I think.
But you don't throw.
But yeah, amazing. Like, because he was such his guitar approach was so broad, and there was so much variety in the music, and I loved that it was this kind of heavy band, but there were all these like soft, flowery acoustic songs, and so yeah, I was really attracted to that, and partly because I was, as much as I've always been an electric player, like when I perform, a ton of my actual at home noodling was on nylon string, and so I liked learning all that. I liked sort of, going for those sounds that, those kind of folky sounds.
That's it. Do you feel like you learnt, you kind of talked about your mum and her having the guitar around, but do you feel like, was there a sort of, and you talked about your high school, I just wanted to talk about, how did community or some sort of community support you kind of moving up as an artist?
Right. Well, I have to mention one of my oldest friends, and that's a guy called Gareth Price, and we went all through high school together. We met when we were about 14, 15, so today's equivalent of what's that, year 11, and we just formed this friendship with a guitar at the center of it. And then I used to go and crash at his house almost every weekend, and we'd turn up with my gold Ibanez pointy headstock guitar, and and I was learning all the Led Zeppelin stuff. He was huge into Hendrix, and so that was kind of, and then so we just spent a lot of time trying to figure stuff out and jamming, and as you do, and so so he was a really major influence, and continues to be, I guess.
And you still get together for jams?
Very occasionally, yeah, very occasionally.
So when you get together, do you still just do the Hendrix and the Jimmy Page stuff, or is it kind of do you kind of
no? So Gareth developed a very kind of effects laden technique, and lots, and whereas I kind of went the opposite direction. I kind of got fewer and fewer effects, except now I'm sort of a bit more interested in them, and also when I kind of got into those jazzy bands that we're talking about from the 90s, I borrowed a lot of ideas from Gareth, like all those sort of big delays and wire sort of sweepy sounds and things. So there was kind of the initial flurry of like technique based sort of like trying to learn heavy metal licks and stuff, which he was much better at than I was. And then I got into jazz, and that sort of took me into a different kind of type of practice. But then, then it was interesting. Sort of our paths crossed again, and we played in a band together called Slacker.
Ooh, I missed that.
Which preceded those kind of Loungehead and Relaxomatic bands and stuff, and that was a kind of a pretty acid jazzy kind of vibe thing. But again, because he was bringing these cool sort of rock based effects guitar approaches into it, it didn't sound as kind of numpty as some of the acid jazz did. I think it really saved it. And I think I took that approach. I borrowed that approach from him, going into the stuff that they did with Loungehead and Relaxomatic. So no Waka Chicka. Which kind of sinks a lot of that sort of retro revision stuff, and more kind of like textural, which opened up more possibilities, I suppose.
Oh yeah, I remember. I think for me, one of the in terms of the effect, I remember you had a color sound wire or something like that, like a really old school.
Yes, I did too. Yes, I thought the black sort of quite a light kind of. Quite a light pedal, not much guts to it, but quite effective. I forgot about the color sound. Thanks for reminding me.
And I just remember, I think hearing you. There was one song. Is it? I forget what it's called, but maybe it's something to do with Candy Apple or something, like with a wire.
Waiting for Candy Apple. Yeah, with slide guitar and wah.
I was like, oh, I've not like that was a new one for me. I was like, oh, that's a thing. Oh, yeah. Okay, cool.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And kind of thing going.
Yeah, and so like it was kind of like it took us away again from the jazziness, from the overt jazziness, or not the jazziness, but the kind of, I don't know. Yeah, it just gave it something different. Yeah.
You didn't have the. I like. Well, you didn't really have the feel that you were being jazzed at.
Not a lot of people want to be jazzed at.
No. I mean, it's yeah. I don't know if I probably told you this story, but I was once doing a gig and someone said, "Oh," they came up to me at the end of my show and said, "I really enjoyed that. That's beautiful. What kind of genre would you say that music is?" And I said, "Well, I guess jazz. I guess." And he said, "Oh, I don't like jazz," and then walked away.
I empathize with that person, actually. Anything that's like really, really jazz, the non-conformist in me, like,
it's like, I don't know about it. Yeah,
but if it's different, if it's an LP from the, that it's in its original sort of conception, but anything that's sort of nowadays that's like really sticks to the jazz template, it's hard to find stuff that's interesting. Doesn't sound like I know that's a big sweeping statement, but it just. It's still got to be pulling in some direction, like it can't just be sort of like here's some post bop or something, like with unadulterate, and it's just a thing.
Yeah. I'm a bit suspicious of labels as well. But I'll actually maybe and I don't know how we're going to sort of do this, and in any kind of reasonable time, but I was thinking maybe, do you want to kind of talk a little bit? My question was like, what are some of your successes? And maybe that could be musical, but like, yeah.
Without sounding too sentimental, I mean, I feel like my greatest successes are is becoming a dad. You know, like,
correct answer. Yeah,
it's a really hard thing to do as a musician and creative person to turn your attention toward other things sometimes. And I've really loved being a dad. I've loved raising three boys, and so I feel like that kind of vastly trumps anything I have done or even could do.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I suppose, like, if you mean kind of in terms of musical successes, yeah, I think just, and this is probably a common answer too, but just that I'm still doing it. You know, that I still in with a lot of intent. I feel like, and I feel like my best is yet to come.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, very much so. You know, I mean, it's not like I sort of played at Wembley and I'm looking back.
Right. It's like, okay.
Yeah, but you know, I've played a few big stages and blah blah blah, and had a few sort of tickles of international this and that, but I think to still be doing it now is and feel like there's a reason to do it, and feel like I have something to say. I think it's probably just luck, you know, just lucky. So I'm enjoying that, and probably another success for myself is marrying my love of language with my love of music, because for a long time they were very separate, you know. So I would do music, you know, and that would be kind of pretty much mostly instrumental music, the odd kind of lyrical attempt here or there, and I was doing these other jobs where I was using language. So I was a copywriter for radio. I worked in a translation agency. I was an ESOL teacher.
That's right.
Kind of there's perhaps some clues that that language is my thing. And I studied Italian at university, and I speak German, and growing up with my family, we always kind of puns and language was a huge thing, and especially being with my parents being English as a second language, having English as a second language, both of them different languages. There was a kind of a curiosity about English and about how it could be used. So I had a few kind of hesitant attempts at writing and singing words over the years, but more recently I've gotten more into that, and found it very, very rewarding to be able to express ideas with in a melodic context and verbally.
I think I remember hearing you. I was going over to your house one time, and you had your green Gretsch. So this might date it, so you'll know what it's like. It was a relatively recently acquired green Gretsch, and you played. Wow. You sang a song about a tui, perhaps, and it sort of very much captured the feel of being in Waitakere, singing about birdsong. And it was pretty early. I hadn't heard you sing much before that.
Right.
So this is probably late thousands.
Interesting, because it makes me think of an instrumental that I've recorded in a few times called Maraho. Sometimes called Maraho Tui.
Maybe.
And that was initially that came about because I was in Maraho and I heard some tui singing there, and it was very kind of diatonic sounding, and I put it to some minor chords, and it made this neat little kind of almost like a blues tune.
Yeah.
Because the tui, there was a little response note from the tui that made a nice little sort of B section, if you will, I may have tried to set that to words at some point. That may have been the case. I don't recall what I did, but I may have certainly
hearing it.
Yeah. Right. Wow.
Yeah, there we are.
And it's interesting you should mention that, because that has since more recently very much informed my approach. As I've been writing lyrics, I have married them with melodies that I've had and instrumental pieces that I've had around in one shape or form for some time.
Yeah.
It was actually, it came at a friend's suggestion, actually. They said, why don't you sort of put those things all together and see if you can puzzle them? And it's been really fascinating to do that.
I was going to ask you, was there somebody, in terms of this, I know a lot of, well, I mean, I've probably been in this situation too, is where you've got like one strength here and one strength here, and someone kind of walks into the room and goes, why don't you just chuck these things together and see what you like? You're good at that. You're good at that. Put them together. But up until that point, has there been, has anyone been like that, and they've just gone, just do that?
Yeah. So I was talking to a couple of friends who kind of do different things at helping and advising musicians, and Roger and Michelle separately, they're kind of involved in the sort of behind the scenes with music and things, and
Mannins.
Sorry, no, Roger Bowie. He's just a big music fan, and he the way I met him was he came to an album launch I did a few years ago, and he was quite taken with the music, and then he rang me out of the blue a year or two later and asked me to come play at this party at his house. He throws these big parties once a year, and then we sort of have caught up a couple of times since then, and it was just a suggestion that he made reasonably off the cuff. So he said, well, why don't you put those things, have you thought about revisiting some of those old instrumentals? And I guess I'd done it before, like as you observed. But probably now I have more confidence with the lyrics, and maybe confidence is the wrong word, but perhaps more tenacity with the lyrics. And now I have a sense of how much work can be required to get a lyric up and running. Some people can do it in their sleep, but for me, I really like to
polish,
like it to sound right for me, So
and you definitely notice that when you are trying to put words which are not songs to lyrics.
I mean, it can be awful particularly because of the word placement and the rhythmic placement and where the emphasis lands. It can be really difficult particularly with when you hear those sometimes they have them in festivals and things, poetry that is what sort of given a melody and set to music. It can be that's really, really hard to pull off, and so it hasn't been my approach. My approach has been to try and work with those original melodies, which are quite well preserved, like your proverbial bee and amber, from having been sort of recorded and played in different settings with many different sort of instrumental groups and things, and then to put to add some melody to those. It's been a neat challenge.
I think I sort of did that with a whole heap of my instrumental tunes, and I don't really sing them, but I noticed that there's something changed for me when I was playing them as an instrumental, knowing that I knew what the lyrics were for each of the notes.
Yeah, and what I found is actually in quite a lot of the cases, I end up taking I've ended up taking a slightly different turn again. You know, the instrumental sort of hook will become a hook in the song, and the melody might be something quite different again.
Oh, yeah.
So it's not necessarily the case that I'm kind of forcing, you know, words onto all of the instrumental things.
Yeah.
But I found that they can be a really great starting point for a chord sequence or something, and then the words come in. I'm just amazed at how useful they are. Yeah.
It's, well, I mean, who says you can't just go back to the board and just say, well, how do I reuse stuff?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, why not? I once met there's a musician who goes by the name of Bernd Friedman.
Wow. That's great.
He's another German, and he was based.
Germans. I'm not German, and I'm just wondering while I'm still having this conversation with you. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's no one who's not German who's watching this either.
Dankeschön. Yeah.
Yeah. We met up in Cologne. Somebody gave me his contact details when I was heading to Germany, and we had dinner. And there's this wonderful, intense man, amazing electronic musician. Has worked with people like David Sylvian and done a lot of work with Hayden Chisholm, who I also once had the honor of working with. And I remember him saying during our conversation, you know, he looked at me quite seriously in the way that we Germans sometimes do, and he said, you know, don't you think we just really make the same song over and over? And that could be taken as quite a despairing kind of idea, but I don't, not necessarily. I found that quite liberating to hear that, and that idea really stuck with me. That you know, theoretically you could be kind of making 300 songs, or you could just work with the same 5. I mean, and there might be no difference in that. As long as you're happy with what you're creating.
That's it.